What if the person who loved your child the most wasn't you? When a millionaire father comes home early from a business trip, he expects silence, routine perfection, maybe a cold hello. But instead he hears sobbing, and what he finds changes everything. His blind daughter clutched in the arms of the new nanny, finally, being held like someone who matters. In that single quiet moment, his entire world begins to unravel. What else had he missed? How much pain had been hidden behind her silence? And what would he do when the truth about his perfect wife and the woman who truly saved his child came to light? Stay with this story. You won't forget it. A gray overcast sky blanketed the quiet suburb of Maple Ridge as the wheels of a silver SUV rolled gently onto the driveway of a stately white house. Inside the grand foyer echoed as Jonathan Blake, a successful tech entrepreneur known for his relentless work ethic, stepped across the marble floor, his leather briefcase still in hand. He wasn't supposed to be home until Sunday, but something pulled him back early this Friday afternoon. A feeling, a whisper in the back of his mind. Still wearing his tailored navy suit from his meeting in Chicago, Jonathan hung his coat and paused. From somewhere deep in the house, he heard something faint, a muffled sound. It wasn't the hum of the housekeeper's vacuum. It wasn't the clatter of kitchen prep. It was crying, small broken sobs, and underneath it, something else, a soft voice, gentle, reassuring. He followed the sound through the expansive hallway past the open-concept living room and into the sunroom where his breath caught in his throat. There on the floor sat Emily, his 7-year-old daughter, her knees curled into her chest, her eyes shielded behind thick glasses. Her tiny arms clutched a threadbare bunny. Her body trembled, but she wasn't alone. Beside her, crouched protectively, was Kate Sullivan, the new live-in nanny Jonathan had hired just 2 weeks ago. A former preschool teacher from Ohio, quiet and unassuming Kate had been recommended through a mutual contact. She wasn't flashy or pedigreed like the caregivers before her. She didn't dress in designer scrubs or come armed with charts and jargon. But what she was at this moment was something Jonathan couldn't ignore. Kate's arm wrapped gently around Emily's small shoulders, her voice no louder than a whisper. "It's okay, sweetheart. No one is going to hurt you. Not while I'm here." Jonathan stood at the threshold, frozen, unmoving, and for reasons he couldn't yet explain, his throat tightened. He had hired dozens of caretakers over the years, all vetted, all polished. None of them had stayed long. They'd reported Emily as difficult, closed off, resistant to touch or teaching. Many hadn't even made it past the first week. But Kate was still steady, unflinching, and Emily wasn't pulling away. That alone shocked him. He had seen his daughter flinch when his wife Monica brushed her hair. He'd heard her go quiet when therapists tried coaxing her to speak. But here on the floor, her back to the world, she leaned just slightly into Kate's arm. A silent trust, a fragile peace. Jonathan's fingers tightened around the handle of his briefcase. How long had it been since he'd seen Emily comforted like this? Since someone had spoken to her with true compassion, not obligation. An image of Monica flashed through his mind. His socialite wife, always immaculate, always composed. Her time was divided between fundraising galas, charity boards, and European boutiques. Monica smiled for the cameras. She posed with Emily at photo ops. But Jonathan couldn't remember the last time he'd seen her bend down to hold their daughter like this. He cleared his throat. "Thank you, Kate." Kate turned surprised, but didn't jump to her feet like so many others might have. She stayed by Emily's side, her hand never leaving the child's back. "Good afternoon, Mr. Blake," she said softly, then turned back to Emily and murmured, "Your daddy's home." Emily lifted her tear-streaked face slowly. Her lip trembled. Then, in a tiny voice barely audible, she said, "Daddy." Jonathan dropped to his knees. "I'm here, Em." The little girl didn't hesitate. She stood and crossed the space between them, throwing her arms around his neck. Her small body shook with sobs as she clung to him, her face buried in his shoulder. Jonathan wrapped her in his arms, the weight of her fragile trust almost undoing him. He kissed her hair and held her silently. In that moment, the air shifted. Something was wrong. Something had been wrong for a long time, and he had been too absent, too busy, too afraid to face it. Kate sat quietly beside them, her hands folded in her lap, her presence calm, unwavering. She didn't ask questions. She didn't push. She simply existed in the moment, allowing space for a father and daughter to reconnect through something deeper than words. Jonathan's mind raced. Why had Emily been crying? What had triggered it? Why hadn't anyone told him she was this distressed? What else had he missed? The sound of high heels tapping against hardwood echoed from the second floor, pulling his attention back to the present. Monica. She appeared at the top of the stairs, a flowing silk dress hugging her figure, pearls draped around her neck, her makeup flawless. She moved with the grace of someone used to being watched. When her eyes landed on the scene below, her expression flickered, annoyance masked by politeness. "Jonathan," she said evenly, her tone clipped. "I didn't expect you home so early." "I needed to come back," he said, still cradling Emily. Monica descended the stairs briskly. "I'm headed to the equestrian benefit. Just came down to grab my clutch." She didn't ask why Emily was crying. She didn't kneel. She didn't so much as glance at the nanny. But Jonathan did. And for the first time in a long while, he looked. At his daughter, her cheeks flushed from tears. At Kate, still quietly seated beside them, offering presence, not pity. And at the pieces of a story he hadn't wanted to read until now. Something was beginning. He couldn't name it yet, but it stirred in his chest, like a fault line shifting under years of silence. Jonathan stood, lifting Emily into his arms. "Come on, pumpkin," he whispered. "Let's go get something to eat." As he turned toward the kitchen, he didn't miss the faint look Kate gave him, one of concern, but also quiet strength. He would never forget it, because this wasn't just a moment. This was the beginning of a truth he could no longer ignore. The warm light of late afternoon spilled into the kitchen, casting long shadows across the granite countertops. Jonathan sat across from his daughter, at the breakfast nook, watching as Emily gently poked at a plate of scrambled eggs Kate had made for her. Though she still wore her thick glasses and her words were few, something about her posture had changed. Slightly more open, a little less guarded. Kate stood by the sink rinsing dishes quietly, offering space but never leaving the room completely. It had been just over 2 weeks since Jonathan's unplanned return home, and in that time he had begun to notice things. Small things. Things he couldn't unsee. Like how Emily would hum to herself when Kate was near, or how she reached out for her hand without flinching, or how Kate always bent to Emily's level to speak, never looming over her like a scolding adult. But what disturbed Jonathan most were the moments when Monica entered the room. The way Emily's little shoulders stiffened, the way her humming stopped, the way she pressed herself closer to the wall like trying to disappear. At first he told himself it was stress. Monica had always been strict. No nonsense, no coddling. That's what she'd called it. She believed structure was everything. That love looked like expectations and praise was earned through perfection. But now with Kate in the picture, Jonathan was seeing a different kind of love. One that didn't demand performance. One that didn't recoil at messiness or tears. That afternoon, Monica swept into the room with the usual whirlwind of elegance and cold efficiency. Her heels clicked sharply against the tile. She wore a tailored navy blazer and crisp white slacks, her lips painted the color of cranberries. She barely glanced at Emily before sighing. "You didn't finish your lunch again." Emily stiffened. She shook her head, voice barely audible. "I wasn't hungry." Monica's tone sharpened. "She always says that. It's just a way to get attention. Don't let her manipulate you, Jonathan." Jonathan's brow furrowed. He looked at the untouched plate. "I don't think she's pretending." "She's fine," Monica snapped. "She had a smoothie earlier. Honestly, Jonathan, you're so gullible when it comes to her." Kate cleared her throat gently, stepping forward. "Actually, she hasn't eaten much today. I tried, but she seemed too anxious." Monica turned slowly. "Excuse me." Kate kept her tone steady. "Emily eats more when she feels safe. It might help to what Monica cut her off. To treat her like a fragile porcelain doll." Jonathan's stomach twisted. He watched as his daughter quietly reached for Kate's hand under the table. Kate squeezed it gently, like an anchor. "Kate's only trying to help," Jonathan said, his voice firmer than he'd expected. Monica rolled her eyes. "You've known her for 2 weeks, and suddenly she's a child psychologist." Kate spoke again softly but without flinching. "She's not just your daughter. She's a child who's been through a lot. Sometimes kindness works better than correction." Jonathan looked at Emily. Her lip trembled. Her fingers clutched Kate's tighter. "I'd like to decide how we speak to our daughter," he said slowly, each word careful. Monica scoffed. Emily shifted in her seat, her voice so small it almost disappeared. Daddy, I can count now. That stopped them both. Monica blinked. What? I can count to 15, Emily said a little louder this time. Kate smiled, encouraging her. Go on, Em. Show them. 1, 2, 3. Emily continued slow but confident, her voice, like morning sun, peeking through thick clouds. By the time she reached 15, Jonathan's throat had tightened with emotion. I didn't even know she could do that, he whispered. She's been practicing, Kate said with quiet pride. Monica shrugged. Every 7-year-old should know how to count. That's hardly impressive. Jonathan turned sharply. It's impressive for her, especially after all she's been through. An uncomfortable silence settled over the kitchen. Monica's expression hardened. Well, don't coddle her. She needs to face reality. Life won't make exceptions for her just because she's different. Emily flinched. Jonathan stood up, his voice rising. Enough. Even Monica seemed surprised. She's not a burden, he said. She's our daughter. Kate stepped back, her eyes locking with Jonathan's briefly. A silent message passed between them. Stand with her. She needs you. Monica's tone turned mocking. You're not going soft now, are you? You used to believe in discipline. I used to believe in you, Jonathan said coldly. Now, I'm not so sure. Without another word, Monica turned on her heel and stormed out her perfume, lingering long after the sound of her heels had faded. Jonathan sank back into his chair. Emily looked up at him with wide eyes. Daddy? Is she mad? He pulled her into his lap. It doesn't matter if she's mad. What matters is that you're okay. She laid her head against his chest, her voice a whisper. I like Kate. She never yells. Jonathan's eyes met Kate's again. This time, there was no doubt. Something was happening here, something honest and raw and maybe even redemptive. But it wouldn't survive in silence. It needed truth and courage. He didn't know what the days ahead would bring. But he did know this. He could no longer pretend. Because once you start seeing your child, you can't go back to pretending you don't. 3 weeks had passed since Monica stormed out of the kitchen. She'd stayed gone for days afterward, choosing to retreat to her sister's house in Connecticut. Jonathan hadn't called her. He hadn't needed to. Something had shifted in him that night. Deep, permanent. For once his loyalty wasn't to keeping the family facade intact, but to the truth living under his own roof. And that truth, it had a name, Emily. The little girl who once walked like a shadow through the house now hummed softly as she measured flour at the kitchen counter, her tiny fingers wrapped around a set of plastic measuring cups. She still wore her thick glasses, still startled easily at loud noises, but her voice had found rhythm, her hands had found purpose, and her heart, her beautiful scarred heart, was slowly beginning to trust again. Kate stood behind her with gentle guidance. Okay, that's 1 cup. Now, level it off just like we practiced. Jonathan leaned against the doorway, silently observing. Emily furrowed her brow, stuck her tongue out in concentration, and smoothed the top of the flour with a butter knife. Got it, she said. Yes, you did, Kate beamed. Jonathan couldn't help but smile. He wasn't just watching a child learn to bake. He was watching a soul begin to bloom. Later that day, the 3 of them stepped out into the cool spring air. Jonathan had suggested a trip to the park, something they hadn't done in years. Emily's face lit up with anticipation as she held tightly to his hand. I can smell grass, she said, as they walked toward the playground gate. And I hear birds, she added. That's because they're singing just for you, Kate replied softly, her hand on Emily's back. They made their way to the red swing set, which stood like a bright flag in a sea of green. Jonathan knelt. You ready, kiddo? Emily nodded with quiet bravery. I want to try. Kate held the swing steady while Jonathan lifted his daughter into it. For a moment she tensed, but then relaxed, gripping the chains. Push me, Daddy. And so he did, gently at first, then higher. The first time she laughed, Jonathan's heart clenched so hard he thought he might cry. It wasn't just a sound. It was a breaking open, a return, a resurrection. Higher, Daddy! She squealed, her voice echoing over the grass. You got it, princess. Kate stood a few feet back, arms crossed, eyes glistening with something deep. It was more than joy. It was reverence. After the swings, they moved to the sandbox. Emily sat cross-legged, her hands running through the grains of sand. It's like sugar, she whispered. You can make anything here, Kate said, kneeling beside her. Like what? Like a castle, or a cupcake, or a mountain. Your hands are your imagination. Jonathan snapped a picture on his phone. Emily, her head tilted into light, her fingers tracing tiny paths in the sand. That evening, they returned home with ice cream cones. Emily's face was smeared with vanilla, her giggles bubbling as Kate wiped her mouth with a napkin. As the sun began to set, they laid on the lawn behind the house. Emily nestled between them. "Daddy," she said dreamily, "this is the best day of my life." Jonathan looked over at Kate. She said nothing, but her hand slid across the grass and gently brushed Emily's hair from her forehead. And that's when the moment came, the one Jonathan would never forget. They were driving home slowly, Emily fast asleep in the back seat, her bunny tucked under one arm. The car hummed quietly as the last light of day faded. Kate stared out the window, her face unreadable. "Thank you," Jonathan said, his voice low. "For today. For everything." Kate nodded, a faint smile on her lips. Emily deserves days like this. Every child does. Jonathan glanced over. "You always talk like you understand." Kate hesitated, her fingers gripping the hem of her jacket. Then softly she said, "I once had a daughter." Jonathan stilled. She was 6. Her name was Lily. Leukemia took her. The words were plain quiet, but they thundered in Jonathan's ears. "I did everything I could," Kate continued. "Hospitals, trials, prayers, but I couldn't stop it. And after she was gone, I couldn't breathe, couldn't smile." Jonathan gripped the steering wheel. "Then I met Emily Kate," said, tears brimming in her eyes. "And she reminded me that love doesn't end. It just changes. That maybe I could mother again, not replace, just love." She turned to him, her voice breaking. "I never meant to get this close. But when I look at her, I see everything I lost, and everything I still have left to give." The car rolled to a stop at a red light. Jonathan looked at her, really looked at her, not as an employee, not even as a caregiver, but as someone whose pain mirrored his own, someone who had stayed when others left, who had believed when everyone else gave up. Kate wiped her eyes quickly. "I'm sorry. I shouldn't have—" "No," Jonathan said quietly. "Thank you for telling me." Behind them, Emily stirred in her sleep and whispered something inaudible. Jonathan's chest ached. He had spent so long chasing profit, prestige, and perfection, but none of that could hold a candle to the sound of his daughter's laughter in the park, to the scent of cake batter in the kitchen, to the hand of a woman who had lost everything but chose to love anyway. And somewhere deep inside, a new realization began to form. Maybe he had been blind too, not in sight but in soul. But not anymore. The storm didn't arrive with thunder or lightning. It arrived in silence. It was a Tuesday afternoon, nearly 6 weeks since Jonathan had returned home early to find Kate comforting Emily. A quiet stretch of healing days had passed since then, filled with painting, baking, afternoon walks, and bedtime stories. Emily had begun asking questions about the stars. She laughed with ease now, and every time Jonathan saw her glowing face, he marveled at how far she'd come. But no amount of healing could prepare him for what Emily showed him that day. He had just come back from a grocery run, arms full of paper bags, when he found Kate and Emily in the kitchen, both unusually quiet. Emily looked up at him, worry behind her glasses. "Daddy," she whispered, "can I show you something?" Jonathan exchanged a glance with Kate, who looked tense. "Of course," he said gently. Emily reached for his hand and led him to the trash bin. She hesitated, then slowly lifted the lid. Inside were torn strips of bright paper, colorful, scribbled familiar. Jonathan frowned. "What's this?" Emily's voice trembled. "I drew pictures of me and Kate and you." She knelt and pulled out several of the ripped pieces. Jonathan crouched beside her. On one torn half, he saw a brown-haired woman holding hands with a small child. On another, a man with glasses and a smile drawn in crayon. "She said they were stupid," Emily said, pressing closer to him, "and a waste of time." Jonathan's heart twisted. "Who?" She hesitated. "Then Mom." The silence in the kitchen was deafening. Kate stepped forward. "That's not all, Jonathan." He looked up. Kate bit her lip. "May I?" He nodded. She knelt and gently rolled up Emily's long sleeve. Jonathan's breath caught. Dark finger-shaped bruises marred the delicate skin of his daughter's upper arm. When Kate gently lifted the leg of her jeans, more bruises were visible along her shin. Jonathan's face went white. "Emily," he said slowly, voice shaking, Did someone do this to you?" She looked away, then nodded, barely whispering. "When I spill things, or talk too much, she holds me really tight. She says I need to learn to be strong." Kate's face was pale. I didn't want to interfere, but I've seen things. Monica belittles her constantly, leaves her alone for hours. One time she told Emily if she ever told you the truth, she'd be sent away. Jonathan stood up, fists clenched. All the denial, all the quiet excuses, all the not, now I'm busy. He'd missed it, all of it. He knelt again and scooped Emily into his arms. "I'm so sorry," he whispered. "I didn't know. I was scared," Emily whimpered. "You're safe now," he promised. No one gets to hurt you again." That's when the sound came. Click, click, click. The sharp rhythm of heels on hardwood echoed from the hallway. Monica entered the kitchen radiant in her white trench coat and diamond earrings. The moment she saw the scene before her, Jonathan holding Emily, Kate standing nearby, pieces of torn drawings on the counter, her eyes narrowed. "What's going on?" she asked coldly. Jonathan stood slowly, his daughter still in his arms. "We need to talk." Monica crossed her arms. "About what?" He held up the crumpled, colorful drawing pieces. "About how you shredded our daughter's art like garbage." Her jaw clenched. She was wasting paper. "You're being dramatic." And the bruises, he demanded, voice low but dangerous. "Explain those." Monica hesitated, just for a second. Then her mask returned. "She bruises easily, and children fall. You're overreacting." Jonathan's tone sharpened. "She told me what you did, and Kate has seen it too." Monica turned her venom on Kate. "You're really going to betray me like this?" Kate didn't back down. "I'm speaking the truth. Emily needs protection." The air in the kitchen thickened like a storm pressing against the windows. Jonathan stepped forward. "I believed we had a happy family, but I see now. It was just a performance, and I won't pretend anymore." Monica's eyes flashed. "So what? Now? You choose her over your own wife. You'd rather side with a child who exaggerates and a nanny who's clearly manipulating you." Jonathan's reply came like a blade. "I will always choose my daughter, and I won't let anyone hurt her again." The silence after that was absolute. Monica's lips curled. "You'll regret this." She grabbed her handbag, threw it over her shoulder, and stormed out the door, slamming behind her like a final punctuation mark. For a long time, no one moved. Then Emily turned to Jonathan and asked, "She's not coming back, right?" He held her tighter. "No, sweetheart," he whispered. "And even if she does, I promise, I will never let her hurt you again." Kate stood quietly behind them, her hands trembling. In that moment, Jonathan realized something profound. This wasn't just about ending a marriage. It was about beginning again, with honesty, with courage, and with people who chose to love, not control. It had been just over 7 weeks since Jonathan first returned home early, and barely 1 week since Monica's departure shattered the brittle shell of their family's illusion. But within the silence she left behind, something new began to grow. Something real. The house, once cold and echoing, began to hum with quiet life. Each morning started the same way, sunlight spilling through the kitchen windows, the smell of eggs and toast filling the air, and the sound of Emily's laughter bubbling up between sips of orange juice. But more than the routine, it was the energy that had shifted. Jonathan felt it in the way his daughter clung to his hand a little less tightly, in the way she walked down the stairs on her own instead of waiting for someone to guide her, in the way she smiled without being asked. And at the center of it all was Kate. She hadn't just stepped in to care for Emily, she had stayed to believe in her. One evening, after Emily had finished decorating a tray of slightly lopsided cupcakes with sprinkles only on the left side, per her specific request, the three of them sat around the dinner table. Kate had made her signature creamy tomato soup, and Jonathan had insisted on helping set the table. Even though Kate pretended not to notice, he placed the spoons on the wrong side. Emily, wearing her favorite sweater with the stars on the sleeves, took a spoonful of soup, made a satisfied sound, then looked up and asked, "Daddy, can I pick dessert tonight?" Of course, Princess Jonathan smiled. She turned to Kate, eyes wide and hopeful. Then, "Can we have vanilla ice cream? I want to eat it with my second mom." The room froze. Jonathan's spoon paused midair. Kate blinked, caught off guard. "What did you just say, Em?" "My second mom," Emily repeated, beaming. "I have one mommy in heaven, and now I have one here on earth." The words hit like sunlight after a storm. Jonathan's eyes welled with tears. Kate's hand trembled as she placed it over her heart. That's the kindest thing anyone's ever said to me." She got up from her chair and knelt beside Emily, pulling her into a tight, tearful hug. "I'll be your second mom forever," she whispered. "If you'll let me." "I want you to be," Emily whispered back. Jonathan looked away briefly, blinking fast. He'd sat in boardrooms where millions were at stake. He'd faced mergers, investors, takeovers. But nothing, not one thing, had prepared him for the weight and beauty of that moment. Later that night, after Emily had fallen asleep, her bunny tucked tightly under one arm, Jonathan and Kate lingered in the kitchen, sipping tea in the soft glow of the pendant lights. "She called you Mom," he said quietly. Kate nodded, her voice thick. "I didn't expect that. You've given her more in a few weeks than most people have in her whole life." "I just showed up," Kate replied. "She did the rest." "No," Jonathan said, meeting her eyes. "You did more than that. You stayed." There was a pause. Then he added, "Because of you." She laughs again. Kate smiled, her eyes glistening. "Because of you," she said. She knows she's safe. They sat in that golden quiet for a long time, the weight of the past slowly releasing its grip. Over the next several days, a new rhythm settled into the house. Mornings were filled with Emily's soft humming as she measured ingredients for muffins. Kate helped her learn how to use kitchen timers by touch. Jonathan traded business calls for pancake flipping and school drop-offs. In the evenings they painted. Emily, despite her vision, had an extraordinary sense of color. She chose her paints with confidence and explained each stroke with rich imagination. One afternoon she handed Jonathan a crayon drawing, 3 stick figures all holding hands under a yellow sun. "This is you," she said, pointing. "And this is me. And this is Mom Kate." Jonathan stared at it, his heart catching in his throat. "It's perfect," he whispered. Kate stepped closer to look. "You forgot something, Em," she teased gently. "What?" "You need a frame for this masterpiece." Emily grinned. Behind the house, a small garden had begun to bloom. Kate had helped Emily plant sunflowers, explaining that they always turn toward the sun. "That's how I want to be," Emily said one morning, her fingers brushing the soft green leaves. "Just like sunflowers. I'll always turn toward Daddy. And Mom Kate." Jonathan watched from the porch, his heart nearly splitting with emotion. Each passing day he saw something miraculous. Not just Emily healing, but Kate too. The shadows behind her eyes began to fade. She smiled more, sang softly when she cooked, laughed freely when flour exploded in the kitchen and coated everything in a fine white dust. And in those moments, Jonathan realized something even deeper. This wasn't just about Emily's growth. It was about all of them. Together, they were becoming something none of them had ever had before. A family. The envelope arrived on a rainy Thursday morning. It was thick, official looking, with the family court seal embossed across the front. Jonathan had been sipping coffee at the dining table, while Emily and Kate played Name That Sound with household items across the room. A game Kate invented to help Emily strengthen her senses. He slid open the envelope with a butter knife. As his eyes scanned the contents, his heart plummeted. "Jonathan Blake is hereby summoned." It was from Monica. She was suing for custody of Emily. He didn't say anything at first. He just folded the letter, placed it back into the envelope, and set it gently on the table, as though the paper itself might shatter his fragile peace. Kate noticed immediately. "What is it?" she asked, rising. He handed her the envelope. She read silently, her expression falling with every line. "She wants custody," she asked, stunned. "After everything." "She claims I'm incapable of raising a visually impaired child," Jonathan said, his voice tight. "She wants Emily placed in a specialized boarding institution. Claims it would offer discipline, structure, and professional care." Kate clenched her jaw. "She wants to erase her." Jonathan nodded. "And she wants half of everything." The air turned thick, heavy. Emily looked up from the floor, sensing the tension. "Daddy?" she asked. "Is something wrong?" Jonathan smiled quickly. Too quickly. No pumpkin, just some paperwork. But his mind was already racing. The next day he met with his attorney, Lou Harris, a calm, pragmatic man who'd helped him through the roughest years of his business career. Now, he was facing a battle of a different kind. Legally, we have leverage. Lou said, tapping the papers. We can prove neglect, we have Kate's testimony, and your daughter's account. But the court favors stability. They'll want to see that Emily has a full, cohesive home life. Jonathan frowned. You mean because I'm a single dad? Lou hesitated, then said it plainly. If you and Kate were married, the court would view Emily's living arrangement as more stable. She'd have 2 legal guardians, a complete family unit. Jonathan sat back in his chair. The idea hit him like a freight train. Not because it hadn't crossed his mind before, but because of how suddenly real it now felt. He drove home in silence, the windshield wipers swiping away raindrops like second thoughts. His hands tightened on the steering wheel. His thoughts spun faster than the car's tires. Marry Kate. Was that what it had come to? But then again, was that really the reason he was hesitating? That night he sat in the kitchen after Emily had gone to bed. The rain tapped gently on the windows. The house smelled of vanilla and cinnamon from the cookies they'd baked earlier. Kate entered quietly, carrying 2 mugs of tea. I heard from Lou, she said, sliding a mug toward him. He called while I was upstairs. Jonathan didn't speak. She sat across from him. He said marriage could help the case. Still, he said nothing. Kate gave a small, sad smile. Look, I know this isn't what you imagined. If you need me to step back, I don't want you to step back, he said suddenly, his voice breaking. Kate blinked. I need to say something, he added, pushing the mug aside. And if I don't say it now, I'll regret it. Kate froze. When Lou first brought up marriage, I dismissed it. Jonathan said it felt like a move, a strategy. But tonight, it doesn't feel that way anymore. He leaned forward, his eyes searching hers. I love you, Kate. Her breath hitched. I love the way you speak to Emily, the way you see her, not as broken but as brilliant. I love your patience, your strength, your quiet faith. She looked away, overwhelmed. I even love the pain you carry, he continued, because it made you the woman who healed my daughter. And, if I'm being honest, it's the same woman who healed me. He stood up, slowly walked around the table, and knelt beside her. This isn't about court documents, he said. It's about building something that's already here. You, me, Emily. We're already a family. He reached for her hand. I know it's fast, and I know you've been hurt. But if there's even a part of you that feels what I feel, say yes. Kate's eyes welled with tears. She pressed her hand to her mouth, breathing shakily. I do feel it, she whispered. I've tried to push it down, tell myself I was just filling a space. But Jonathan, this is my home. You're my home. He pulled her into an embrace, the 2 of them holding each other in the warm kitchen, the soft glow of the pendant light above, bathing them in gold. Neither of them said anything more that night. They didn't need to. They had already said the only thing that mattered. The wedding was nothing like the high society affairs Jonathan had once attended with Monica. There were no crystal chandeliers, no Michelin-starred catering, no celebrity photographers, no grand ballroom or custom calligraphy. Instead, there was a string of white lights looped through the hedges in the backyard, a few folding chairs arranged in neat rows, wild flowers in glass jars, and a small arch Jonathan had built with his own hands just days earlier, painted white, decorated with Emily's crayon drawings, laminated and clipped like paper lanterns. It was in every way that mattered perfect. The sky was pale blue, the air warm with the first whispers of summer. Birds chirped in the distance as neighbors gathered, some offering to bring desserts or set up chairs. Jonathan's longtime assistant, a widow in her 60s named Carol, wept openly when she saw Emily in her soft pink dress and daisy flower crown. Kate stood behind the sliding glass door, her reflection barely visible in the pane. Her dress was simple, a sleeveless ivory gown that flowed to her ankles, and her hair was gathered loosely, tendrils falling around her face. She wasn't shaking from nerves. She wasn't even thinking about the ceremony. All she could think about was the sound of Emily laughing outside. From the kitchen window, Jonathan watched his daughter scatter petals from her little basket, walking barefoot across the freshly mowed grass with absolute delight. She called out to the guests as she passed them. "This is my daddy's wedding," she beamed. A moment later, the music started, a soft instrumental piano piece that Kate used to play for Emily at bedtime. As Kate stepped through the door and into the sunlight, time seemed to slow. Jonathan stood beneath the arch, his eyes locking on hers. He didn't see the nanny he'd hired on a whim. He didn't see a replacement or a second best. He saw his future. Kate walked toward him, each step slow, steady, and filled with quiet purpose. Emily stood beside Jonathan, her small hand clutching his. When the officiant cleared his throat and began the ceremony, the crowd fell silent. Jonathan and Kate, he began. You stand here today not as strangers bound by circumstance, but as two hearts that found each other through shared love for a child. You found light in loss, hope in healing, and joy where there was once silence. Kate's eyes glistened. Jonathan's fingers trembled slightly as he reached for hers. Do you promise the officiant continued to love and care for one another, and for Emily in all the days to come? They answered in unison. We promise. Emily clapped her hands, jumping slightly in place. Now, we're a real family. The guests laughed, several dabbing their eyes. Jonathan knelt and kissed the top of his daughter's head. We've always been real, kiddo. Today just makes it official. They signed the papers under the shaded oak tree with Carol and a neighbor as witnesses. Kate became not only Jonathan's wife, but also Emily's legal mother. That evening, the house was filled with the smell of homemade pie, roasted chicken, and fresh bread. Neighbors brought casseroles and bottles of cider. Laughter filled the air as children played in the yard, and the soft glow of the string lights painted everything in gold. After the guests had left and the yard had quieted, Jonathan stood on the porch watching Emily chase fireflies across the lawn with her flashlight. Kate came to his side, her hand sliding into his. She's never looked so free, she said. That's because she is, Jonathan whispered. The next morning a letter arrived from the court. Jonathan opened it slowly, Kate and Emily by his side. Monica's lawsuit has been dismissed. He read aloud, barely believing the words. The judge ruled that Emily is now in a safe, stable, and loving home, with both biological and legal parents present. Full custody remains with the father. Kate released a shaky breath, her hand covering her mouth. Emily, seated at the table with her bunny in her lap, asked, Does that mean she can't take me away anymore? Jonathan knelt beside her. No, sweetheart. No one's taking you away. Ever. Emily leaned in, wrapping her arms around his neck. Promise. He kissed her forehead. With all my heart. Kate joined the hug, and for a moment, the world fell away. There were no battles to fight, no wounds to bandage, no more fear to hide from. Only a beginning. Weeks passed. The sun rose earlier now, bathing the house in golden light each morning. The once quiet halls now echoed with music, laughter, and the clatter of tiny footsteps chasing joy. Emily thrived in the stability of their new life. With her parents, Jonathan and Kate, by her side, she transformed from a timid girl into a confident little firecracker with a stubborn streak, a sense of humor, and a passion for expression that couldn't be contained. Each morning, Jonathan walked her to her new school, an inclusive arts-based academy nestled just outside town. It wasn't fancy or exclusive, but it was full of teachers who saw children as potential, not problems. Emily joined the art club and began painting with textures and raised surfaces, using her fingers to shape vibrant worlds from imagination. She couldn't see her work the way others did, but she felt it, understood. It breathed it. Her favorite project was a family portrait molded from clay. Jonathan tall and smiling, Kate arms open wide, and Emily in between, her face lifted toward the sky. You have a gift, her art teacher said one day. Emily smiled. My mom says I see with my heart. Back at home, Kate and Jonathan settled into a rhythm that felt as though it had always been. Jonathan still handled his business, but from the sunny nook in their home office where he could take breaks to help Emily with math, or sneak downstairs to steal cookies from the cooling rack, Kate became more than a mother. She became a friend, a coach, a guide. She helped Emily cook, paint, garden. On Saturdays, they hosted pancake brunches for neighbors. The backyard bloomed with sunflowers, the very first plant Emily had ever chosen. These flowers are like me, she said one morning, pressing her palm to a golden petal. They always face the light. One evening after story time and goodnight kisses, Emily called out from her bedroom, Daddy. Jonathan opened the door and stepped inside. What is it, Pumpkin? I had a dream, she whispered. Want to tell me about it? She nodded. I saw my first mommy. Jonathan walked over, sat on the edge of her bed. You did. She was in a big garden full of light. She smiled and said she was happy I wasn't alone anymore. She said, Mom, Kate is a gift from heaven. Jonathan's throat closed. She said she loves me, Emily added, and that she watches us every day. Kate, who had stepped quietly into the doorway, wiped at her cheek. She is watching you, baby, she said softly, entering the room. And I know she's proud of how strong you are. Emily smiled, then reached out for both of them. I love you both. They leaned in, wrapping their arms around her small frame, soaking in the warmth of the moment. Later that night, when the house was still and the stars blinked quietly overhead, Jonathan and Kate sat on the back porch, hands clasped. Hard to believe this was once a house full of silence, he said. Kate looked around at the soft light pouring from the windows, the family photos pinned to the fridge, Emily's artwork on display across the walls. Now it's a home, she said. He turned to her, heart full. The only one I've ever really had. They sat together, not needing to speak, because they knew. Their story hadn't ended with a wedding or a court case. This was only the beginning. In the end, this wasn't a story about a nanny. It wasn't even just a story about a blind little girl who learned to smile again. This was a story about what happens when someone chooses to stay. When they decide that love isn't just a feeling, but a commitment, a promise, a quiet presence that endures even when the world looks away. Jonathan had spent years lost in the noise of success, chasing numbers and prestige, while his daughter faded into the background. But in Kate, he found someone who didn't flinch at brokenness. Someone who didn't run from the messiness of grief or the patience love demands. Instead, she stepped forward. She listened. She saw. And because of that, Emily began to see too. Not with her eyes, but with her heart. She learned that safety doesn't always come with perfection. That healing isn't about forgetting pain, but about building something stronger in its place. And that family isn't made of blood alone. It's forged in the quiet moments, the whispered bedtime stories, the hand held in fear, the voice that says, "You are not alone." For anyone listening who has felt invisible, for anyone who's carried guilt for not seeing sooner or loving better, for anyone who's afraid it's too late to make things right, remember this. Sometimes all it takes is one act of courage, one person willing to stay, one open heart. And in that choice, a broken house can become a home again. A frightened child can become a radiant soul. And love, true lasting defiant love, can write a new ending even after all hope seems lost. Because no matter how dark the past may be, the heart always knows the way toward the light.